This is the Powered Up Podcast, show 33.
For me, the joy of teaching as I'm getting older is not really about the age of who I teach. It's not even about what I teach. It's about how I teach. So it's about reading the kids as they're coming in the morning.
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Ken Ehrman, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I am here with my co-host, Mr. Matt Ranger Rogers. Matt, what an episode. What a recording, what an interview. You and I are jacked up. It's, like you said at the end of the interview, it's now 11:15 at night. We've recorded actually multiple recordings today. We're making use of our summer schedule as best as we can, and I'm going to be up for probably 2 more hours. Not because of the baby.
Yeah, it is. It was an awesome episode, and I think we've been really fortunate to have a ton of incredible interviews. Maybe I'm biased that he's a 4th grade teacher. Maybe I'm biased that he's a national park ranger. Maybe I'm biased because he has a sweet beard. I don't know. All these things are true factors. Christopher is the absolute man, and this is an incredible episode. But on other notes, things are great. I am so excited to get into this episode like you are as well. Just so much, incredibly good stuff.
Like you said, just a great interview. I felt, we connected a couple times via email, social media, a quick phone call to get things set up. And I would say halfway through, I felt honored to be a part of the conversation with him because he's been at this for a long time. He has so much insight, both instructionally and emotionally, what's important to be a quality teacher and just a quality person in the field of education. And I just felt in awe of the conversation, and I just felt like I learned a lot. I feel as though he escalated my career 1 notch higher because I was able to talk to him for an hour and 20 minutes because he has such a unique, wise perspective. And I just so much appreciated the time and the frankness and the authenticity that he gave to us.
We've been really lucky that I feel like we're doing some of these podcasts obviously for the podcast, right? It's for other people to hear the voices and the thoughts of great people. And he was one of the many that felt like a podcast for us. Like I left today's episode feeling like this one was for me. Like I needed that reset, and we've done a gamut of topics, and just the realigning of this podcast in general. That's the beauty of this. The realigning of priorities and seeing people that could have a negative perspective and could kind of back out and take the easy route because they've earned that ability. They just don't, because they care about the right things. And that is just the most addicting part of education. Surrounding yourself with great things turns you into a great thing. And this episode is it's cream of the crop.
Yeah, I really don't want to delay it anymore. You're going to listen to this episode. It's definitely one of our longer ones, the interview, because Matt and I just didn't want it to end. And you're gonna hear a lot of inspiration, a lot of motivation, and a lot of very sound, practical instructional strategies that you can bring into your classroom from a K-12 experience. So I don't know that I formally introduced. It's Christopher Albrecht. He's from New York. He's a former Teacher of the Year in 2018, and also shared that he's in the National Teacher Hall of Fame. So extremely high accolades, but putting those all aside, just an incredible educator for all of us to learn from. So without any further delay, let's jump into that interview with Christopher. Hi, Christopher. Welcome to the Powered Up podcast. How you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful, Ken. Thank you for having me on Powered Up.
Absolutely. We're super excited to dig into this conversation. I know our audience will find out Matt's more excited. Not to say I'm not, but you have a strong connection to the national parks, which is a passion of Matt's that he's shared. So I know that'll come out in our conversation. But to kick things off, why don't you officially introduce yourself, share with us where you are typically coming from, but you can also share where you are now and what your journey in education has looked like in a kind of a snapshot.
Absolutely. So my name's Christopher Albrecht. I'm a fourth grade teacher in Brockport, New York. It's a little town that's west of Rochester towards the Buffalo side. And I've taught there for 23 years. Prior to that, I taught 3 years down in West Virginia. I started teaching in 1995, the year the internet entered the classrooms. And I was hired as a half-time computer technology teacher in a middle school, and they hadn't figured out the internet yet. So that very first year, I had to do some searching and digging and panicking and a little bit of faking it. And fortunately, I had some kids in that class that understood it better than I did, and we spent a lot of Saturdays together getting a school wired. And by the end of that first year, 1995-96, we'd wired 400 computers and had the internet up and running down in a very rural part of West Virginia. So that's where my roots are. I have 3 children. One of them is a teacher up in Vermont, so she teaches north of Burlington in a little town called St. Albans, and my other son is at the University of Vermont right now, and my son Corey is at the University of Massachusetts at Lowell working on a plastics engineering degree. He'll be finished in December. So, and my path in education, it was a panic start. My wife was in grad school in West Virginia when we got married, and looked for that first job. And most of the time, most teachers don't get their ideal first job. My first year, I told you that I was a computer technology teacher. They wanted me to wire and get this thing called the internet going and what email was, and they didn't understand any of it. Frankly, I didn't either. And they told me that they would have a halftime position, second halftime position for me, and I thought that was great. At the time, halftime was $11,250, so $22,500 sounded, for a guy that was broke working at a swimming pool. I guess it sounded okay with insurance, and they promised it to me, but I never really, I was young and 23 years old and didn't really ask what the second half was going to be. And 2 weeks into the school year, I was a halftime kindergarten teacher. So in the morning, I started out as a middle school teacher for 3 periods, taught that, and then when it ran across to the kindergarten, I had to make sure that I went to the bathroom because the kindergarten never had a man in it before, so they only had a ladies' room over there. So it was an interesting first year. After that, I went to full-time computer tech for the 2 years, and then after my daughter was born, we moved back up to Rochester. So that's been my life in teaching. Been very fortunate throughout my career to have some great things happen to me. I am the 2018 New York State Teacher of the Year. I was inducted into the National Teachers Hall of Fame in 2019. I just came back this past week, published my second book called The Rediscovery of Hope and Purpose. That book it's published through NFB Publishing up in Buffalo, New York. And right now last week is the #1 bestseller in educational psychology for best new releases on Amazon. And my previous book did the same thing. So it's called Unconventionally Successful. That book was interesting. That book was asking the question who your favorite teacher is and what we can learn life lessons from. This second book was written at the start of the pandemic, realizing that we would have a challenge with hope and purpose in our lives. A lot of people's lives have been disheveled. As a teacher, we see both sides of it. We see the parental side of it, and we see the kid side of it. And parents' lives especially, their lives, a lot of them have stopped working for their kids, especially those that are remote or in hybrid situations. So I realized a lot of people were going to be looking for purpose in their lives. So I wrote this book over the course of the past year and just released it 2 days ago out in Port A, Kansas at the Hall of Fame. So that's a nutshell of my career. I love, I'm at 26 years in, and I love teaching right now more than I've loved it any other year. And it's strange to say that coming off a very tough year of very, very hard work. Parents have really been wonderful. They've really towed the line when they've needed to for me this year. I'm very proud of them. It was not an easy year to be a parent. It was not an easy year to be a teacher. So for the most part, I would say 95% of the people I'm around, whether it's parents, kids, kids, they all really did a great job this year, and I'm very, very proud of that, because it was a challenge. We really faced a tough one, and next year could be just as challenging as we come back from this thing.
So, Matt, I don't know how you're feeling, but I'm already feeling very powered up. We actually just finished a recording talking about teacher burnout and how to avoid it, and we talked a lot about finding mentor teachers, finding teachers that have been at it longer, that can support you, that can help you, really drive through those years of struggle or those feelings of burnout. And we talked about, how do you find them? How do you identify them? I can already tell Christopher is the person that you're finding. You said 26 years in and you love it more than the day you started. Comments like that are what younger teachers need to see, mid-career teachers need to see, end-of-career teachers need to see, to bring a product to their students that's creating an atmosphere that's best for them to learn. So there's a lot that I want to talk to you about. I want to just maybe focus on the beginning part of your career real quick, and then we'll probably bypass past that. But teaching middle school, setting up the internet, and teaching kindergarten at the same time, what did you learn from that very diverse experience that you feel has carried through to your, for lack of a better term, more normal teaching career, that you think is really beneficial that you had to go through that?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, the early lessons from the beginning, I would say I was very well supported by administration back then. I had an administrator that valued the amount of hours I was putting in, and really thought that was wonderful. So she was just very supportive of what I was doing. So having that support network there, I was mentored very well by a guy named Steve. He was an art teacher. That mentorship was there as well. But what I take from that time period to now, and I think this is your question, Ken, is what's been resonating now for the 26 years. I would say that I was fortunate in the fact that I was clueless going into that first year with the curriculum. There was no curriculum in computers, so I got to design the curriculum with the kids themselves. So I'm there with adolescents, middle school 7th and 8th graders, and we were learning it together. And that opportunity, I think, has carried through my whole career, where there's this almost a fear early on that if you don't know the curriculum better than the kids, or if you don't have the curriculum down pat, you're going to be very nervous about things. Whereas I really had no curriculum to go by, especially in those morning sessions. So there I was on Saturdays. My wife would bring food over to the school. I'd be eating lunch with kids, and we'd be working on wiring. I mean, we were up in ceilings, and you name it, we were doing it. And what I did is it taught me to listen to kids more than I think we do in our first early years. And there's a lot of motivation that comes from that, because very quickly you get close to the kids, and once you build that relationship with the kids, teaching gets very addicting very fast. And that's the one element in my career that I think that's resonated all the way through is just the stress of the importance of the teacher-student relationships, student-to-student relationships, teacher-to-teacher relationships. That if you're happy in the people you're working with, and you get that chance to make those personal connections, you pretty much can persevere through anything. And I did through that first year. I would say that first year was actually tougher than this past year, because I was a little on the scared side. I've got a new kid, I've got a wife, and I have to support them in some way, because Jenny couldn't work at that point. Someone had to watch my daughter, and we were down in West Virginia, and I had really no other choice other than to try to survive through that first year. A lot of first-year teachers feel that way. I was fortunate enough to get it, where I just looked at the kids and I was honest with them. I didn't try to candy coat anything. I didn't lie to them. Like, I knew what I was doing. I said, let's learn it together. Let's figure this out together.
I think that's if we've had some incredible guests, and I'm already going to put you high on the list, but We had a guest, and Ken, you might remember where it was, where like you were the one individual we had was tasked with like picking up kids on the bus and getting them to school and then coaching them afterwards and then like literally do it all. And I think that there's an element.
Lee Carlson.
Thank you. And so we interviewed early on, and he's just an incredible individual. And there's an element of just viewing a situation as a task at hand as opposed to a challenge. And I've got to imagine whether it was you being young, whether it was you being just trying to do the best job you can, but the idea of balancing both of those facets at the beginning of the school year is unbelievable. Like taking all that time to figure out the unknown and then also kind of you're definitely not the expert of the internet. That's something you already shared, but to kind of express and jump in is something that I'll say newer age teachers, I'll include myself, are so fearful to fail that the idea of going alongside is a challenging thing, especially early on in your curricular area and your career. That just like, that's so, I guess there's two ways to take that. Either your administration knows that you're really up for any challenge possible and they can really challenge you, or it just sets your kind of elasticity as a teacher to kind of handle anything. If you made it through that challenge on, as you mentioned, it was one of the toughest, if not toughest years you've ever taught. If you made it through that, you can make it through anything type mentality. So when you come into fourth grade where you have a more set curriculum and you're doing it all day, it's not necessarily easier, but it's more standardized. You have more control of it.
I would agree with you. I would definitely agree with that. Yeah.
So with that being said, kind of talking about that elementary perspective, what are some of the attributes that really make you stand out in fourth grade? Because fourth grade is honestly, and this is me being biased as a fourth grade teacher, Ken as a fifth grade teacher, I think fourth grade is the absolute best grade, but it's also what I live every day. What are some of those attributes that made you love teaching fourth grade and make you love teaching fourth grade that just stand out, or ways that you bring your own personal interests into the classroom?
Well, I teach any grade. I think fourth grade, if we're talking fourth grade in particular, one of the things that you see is a lot of cognitive development from the beginning of the year till the end, a lot more abstract thinking. As the year goes on, we start getting into current events, and kids are reporting on current events, and the discussions, I end up, by the end of the year, I'm sitting back more, and they're leading the discussions, and they're having a lot more ownership of the educational process themselves, because they're ready for it at fourth grade. But the other day I did back in Emporia, this is just yesterday, actually, I was just finishing this up yesterday about this, well, not maybe a little earlier than this. Back in Kansas, we did a thing where we did a community event. We got to do their very first community event that they've had since 18 months ago, since the Giants shut down. The library had their very first event. Since I was out there with the book release, I decided to stay one more day and do a day of service in Emporia. And one of the things that I'm passionate about, I'm a geology guy. I love rocks and minerals. It goes along with the national parks and hiking. I guess you put rocks in your pocket and you carry them for a little while, and then you set them down somewhere else, and those kind of things. And one of the things that I thoroughly enjoyed is shark's teeth. So I brought out. I've been down in a mine down in North Carolina. I've got all kinds of Miocene dirt, and I brought it out. And last night when we were over in Kansas, I don't think I had many kids that were in fourth grade. These kids were like kindergarten, first grade, second graders, and I was enjoying teaching them just as much as I was enjoying teaching fourth graders. For me, the joy of teaching as I'm getting older is not really about the age of who I teach. It's not even about what I teach. It's about how I teach. So it's about reading the kids as they're coming in the morning. So if you're talking fourth grade, one of the things that I love the most is to be able to look at the kids as they're coming in and make split decisions on how I'm going to teach that day. I might go to small group that day. I might be more independent that day. I might be more whole group that day. Might be much more collaborative some days than other days, just based on the basic behaviors of the kids. Yesterday, who showed up? Kindergarten through second grade for the shark's teeth thing. So here I am teaching a grade that really I haven't taught in a very long time. And I had to look at that and then completely change the way I was going to teach based on the kids that were there. We had 75 kids, all under the age of 7 right there. I had to definitely change my methods immediately. And so that's really the fun of it as you get older, is you start looking at these kids and you think to yourself, okay, well, today this is what it looks like. You know what, we're going to change it up a little bit this way, and that it's going to be okay. The tough thing is when you come out of college, for younger teachers, we were just talking about younger teachers, you have a set lesson plan, and you're kind of pitted in that method, right? And you're so worried about, okay, we're going to do think, pair, share today, or we're going to do, some whatever method you choose, and then you stay locked in that, and that's when lessons tend to fail on you. If the lesson itself, if the teaching method itself doesn't match the behavior of the student, that's where teachers fall down. It's not necessarily the curriculum itself; it's in the method that we teach and the way we teach. Well, and that applies to 4th grade too. So to answer your question, I love 4th grade. I do, but I think I'd fall in love with any grade over time, because you get locked in over years of doing it. And I've been a 4th or a 5th grade teacher now for 23 of those years. We used to loop for the first 3 years that I was there at Brockport, but now I think I could fall in love with any grade. I love middle school, and I taught middle school, and that can be a challenging age to teach sometimes, because their behaviors they can love you, hate you, love you, hate you, love you, hate you, all within 20 minutes in a middle school setting. So, I mean, it's the ups and downs of middle school, but as long as you can, that's the art of teaching. There's a science of teaching, which is gathering data and gathering information on your kids, and trying to look at where their growth areas are needed, where they're strong, and designing lessons that way. That's the science of teaching. But the art of teaching is truly looking at those children or looking at those adolescents and saying, okay, this is what's walked into my classroom today in terms of behaviors, in terms of thought process, energy level, and this is how I'm going to teach to that, because I've got a bag of tricks and I know how to change my lesson on the spot based on their behaviors. That's the tough thing to get across to a student teacher. When you get a student teacher in the classroom, they're so set in what they've got to get through. We're in New York State, so they have all these competencies they have to complete to get their certification, and those competencies are very locked in a method. The tough thing is to have them divorce that method and be able to change on the spot based on the kids is really the art of teaching, and that's something we have to teach our young teachers. Very, very important, because really you maximize your classroom time by doing that.
I love what you said about the science versus the art of teaching. I've never heard that, but it makes complete sense. I feel like I have heard it, just indirectly. So, talking about using the art of teaching, you talked about you have these bag of tricks. Is there a way, and maybe you've done this with student teachers that you've worked with before, is there a way to, one, expedite the manner in which you build up those tools that you have at your disposal, and how you learn to read your students to make those on-the-fly adjustments? Or is it truly you have to have experience and you have to fail and reflect and find where you could have gone better? What would you say is the best way to try to get more towards the art of teaching and using the science of teaching to support that?
So there was one of my favorite people in sports is a guy by the name of John Wooden. John Wooden was the basketball coach at UCLA, 10 national championships. I love following him. Oh my gosh, I've got his books, and John Wooden said that his high school basketball coach, now John Wooden was an All-American, played at Purdue, a fantastic basketball player, and then goes on to a fantastic coaching career. John Wooden had a coach that said, the team that fails the most during a basketball season wins the most championships. And that's kind of a strange statement to make right there. But when you think about it, the teacher that tries the most things, the teacher that takes the most bold moves and tries to advance the furthest in terms of trying new ideas, trying new boundaries, is going to fail more than the teacher that doesn't try at all. But I would argue that the person that tries the most that goes outside the boundaries, breaks the rules of common convention, not that breaks the rules of the school, but breaks the rules of what's been done before, and does it with dignity and respect. That teacher's going to fail a lot. They're going to make mistakes, but they're going to learn faster from those because they've made those mistakes if they're resilient. So we really have to, that's where that leadership piece came in my first couple years, where I had a principal that let me fall on my face, but never let me feel bad about it. So that's where great leaders, your great administrators come in. But I would have to agree with John Wooden on that one, that's an important part of it. I would love to recreate student teaching experience too. One of the initiatives that I did with the National Teachers Hall of Fame, and I was talking, Randy Weingarten came out the other day for this book release, and we had a great conversation about this one thing. I had a girl 2 years ago named Jenna Pennington. She teaches in Olathe, Kansas now, and she won a national award. And my wife and our kids are now in college or are grown up, and we have a little room in our house. She came out. She was sent out by the National Teachers Hall of Fame to live with my wife and I, and she student taught with me. So in a very short amount of time, what she saw was not just when you show up at school and not just the end of the day at school, but she also had to see what I did after school, my exercise regimen. She had to see how I eat dinner. She had to see when to make my lunch for the next day. She saw when I go to bed, pajamas, what I watch on TV, what it's like to go to the grocery store and get hugged, what it's like to the grocery store and see some kid hide behind somebody. She saw me how I react to even just living in the same town that I teach in. I would love to see a program started where student teachers actually mentor the life of a teacher, because teaching, we know it. We're all three guys. We all shave or don't shave some days, and you think about teaching when you're shaving. You think about teaching when you're sleeping. You think about teaching when you're brushing your teeth. You think about teaching when you're having dinner with your wife and you're talking about it. And it's one of those things that it's a lifestyle. It's not one of those things that you can necessarily just leave and go home like a 9-to-5 job. So she got to see that. Her experience was not a 14-week experience. Her experience was a 5-week experience. But she was 2 years into her career by the time she was done. Malcolm Gladwell wrote the book Outliers. I don't know if either one of you have read Outliers. I think it's one of the best books written in the past 10 years, but he's got the rule of 10,000 hours. And 10,000 hours to become a master at something. So if you take 7 years of teaching times 183 school days times about 7 to 8 hours a day, that equals 10,000. So we really need a mentorship of some sorts early on in careers where it lasts almost 7 years. The 1 year mentorship thing, I don't think is correct. It should be a developing process. We never do that to kids. I don't know why we do it to teachers. I would like to see a better support system early on so teachers could be set up for success by failing more often, by trying new things.
So kind of going off of that perspective, I think that it's very accurate. And thinking about the quote about the one who fails the most is the one who will win championships at the long run is a great perspective to have. And you also brought up the idea of us getting divorced or new teachers getting divorced from traditional practices. But I think one of the hard parts, and I'm not a parent, but we have attributes of parenting or in our case, husbanding based off the model of what we had. And the same type thing is my initial years in teaching modeled the best teachers that I had growing up. I tried to emulate them, but they were my model. And unfortunately, that was a good time ago where they didn't necessarily have technology integration or they didn't have state testings with these kind of mandates or high stakes that are associated. So how would you encourage someone who maybe doesn't have a dynamic past or someone who's encouraged to go into education but doesn't necessarily have the guidelines or is really searching, wanting to challenge themselves and be the best version for their kids, but doesn't necessarily know where to start?
I would start by being an observer. So a lot of times when I'm new at something, I think when a lot of people are new, even if it doesn't even relate to school, We tend to move twice as fast because we're nervous. So I would say slow down. If you don't understand something, slow down, pause. I'm even slowing my voice down right now to kind of model that. I would slow down even the way that I talk, the way that I look, the way that I think. So I'm making more accurate decisions. I think when we move fast, things fly by us that we don't necessarily see. There's a lot of things that happen in a classroom every second. In many cases, there's 25 human beings in a room all together. So there's a lot of things going on internally and externally. So I would say to a new teacher, someone that doesn't have a full bag of tricks, that doesn't feel necessarily that confidence, take your time. Don't worry so much about getting through everything. Worry about doing quality things. So if it's going to take you just a little longer to do a lesson and do it well, then do that rather than try to fit everything in and jam it. Because I think what that does, that increases the stress level of the teachers, and kids sense that, and that increases the stress level of the kids. Teachers' vibe, aura, whatever it is you want to call it, presence in a classroom does affect the chemistry of the way the kids think in the classroom. So if a teacher's really jacked up, the kids are going to get really jacked up. If a teacher's really mellow and calm, it tends to calm the kids down. So there is a calming factor, but the key to it is the teachers also got to be true to themselves also. So you don't want to be a character that you don't want to be. And the truth is, I've had 16 student teachers over the course of my career, and 2 of them did not go into teaching. The other 14 are all employed. And but 2 of them discovered when they got into it that this really wasn't for them. That's a shame that they discovered that in the 4th year of college, because then it's starting all over again. So what we need to do is maybe reinvent when the first experiences in the classroom happen. I would say in the freshman year of college, if you think you want to be a teacher, wouldn't it be something to do a student teaching experience right in year 1? Get them placed at age 19 in a classroom. It might be a little hard at the high school level because the students that are just a year or 2 younger, but at the elementary level, that would be very doable. And I think it would help weed out people from making a mistake in their lives and going into something that they were not meant to do. Because I don't think teaching's for everybody. Teaching is you have to have hard work, you have to have passion, and you have to really love what you're doing, because teaching, there is as high as you can get in teaching with the joys that come with it. There are some very challenging things that come with teaching as well, and those things you have to be able to balance highs and lows in a personal emotion too.
So the way you're speaking to us, Christopher, is so insightful. I feel like I'm learning so much from this conversation. Do you have the way you're quoting John Wooden, do you have conversations like this in your classroom, the teachable moments, the times where you just want to set all the curriculum to the side and you want to talk to your kids about hard work or work ethic or making the way to make, positive choices? Is that something that is involved in your classroom a lot, and how do you weave it in, and how do you feel it's really beneficial to your students?
Well, that's great. Ken, you that's great insight right there, but you just kind of went in a very, very positive direction of what education is. I'm going to go back to Matt. So Matt, if you think about your 4th grade classroom, at the beginning of the year, what I would say, you teach things very explicitly at the beginning of the year. So whether we're in a community circle or discussing things, I might very explicitly say, this is what we say when we do this. This is what we say when we do this, and actually teach those behaviors. By mid-year, those behaviors are ingrained, where it doesn't become a lesson anymore, but it just becomes part of the natural progression of all the lessons. So whether you want to call it social emotional learning or just behavior coaching or character building, there's a bunch of different packages we can put it in, but I think it's all the same stuff. There's an evolution as the year goes on. So very, very explicit behavior teaching at the beginning of the year. But if you're teaching behavior at the middle of the year or the end of the year the same way you're teaching it at the beginning of the year, then you're not doing it right, because it should evolve as the year goes on. You shouldn't be teaching explicit lessons on classroom procedures or behaviors mid-year or end year, because those should just be ingrained in little reminders as you as you go along, as the year progresses. And eventually you hope the kids adopt those and start recognizing them themselves. We have little sheets of paper. We're the Hill School Hawks, so the hawk is our mascot. Thank you, Matt. And we have these little hawk tickets, and it's not just unique to my classroom. It's for the whole school. But at the beginning of the year, I might be the one recognizing things and writing them down on hawk tickets and turning those in. But by mid-year, the kids take ownership of that and start recognizing behaviors on their own. One of the things that we need to remind ourselves of is children look at the world a little bit different than adults, especially at the elementary level. Secondary level, they're getting closer to the way we think. But at the elementary level, kids can be told, one of the things Matt's really good at is Matt's a really good writer and he's really fast in gym. But one of the things he's working on is spelling. So if you ever see Matt needing help with spelling, it's okay to help him. I think it's okay to say to kids right out what you're good at and what you're working on. That way they're empowered to help each other. And you set up that expectation that we help each other in this classroom. A service-minded classroom, people that teach service-mindedness in the classroom, behaviors are extinguished. I have kids that are autistic. I had a girl this year with Tourette's syndrome with very strong challenges. But when we empowered the kids and told them this is what she's challenged with and this is what she's really good at, then they recognize, okay, we can lean on her for this. And that means I've got to do a really good job of making sure when she does something in her wheelhouse, what she's really good at, we recognize that. And when somebody else helps her out with something that's not in her wheelhouse, we recognize that as well. We have to recognize the strengths in our kids and allow the kids to see those strengths within themselves so they develop purpose. But also, it's okay to admit your weaknesses. I think we're very afraid as adults to admit our weaknesses. Kids, I don't think, are all that different. We need to get past that and just empower people to help other people by being service-minded. Service-minded doesn't necessarily mean like going to rake leaves at a park or do a project. Service-mindedness just means caring for the person that's next to you in the present moment. And that's the way we teach it in school, and it evolves as the year goes on.
You said one of my favorite words, empower. That's
right in your almost part of your
It honestly was it was part of the brainstorm of coming up with the name of this podcast. Empowering was really the word that started the idea of the name, and be empowering was the slogan of my room for the last 5 years that I was teaching 5th grade.
Great.
I had a poster, an icon, everything, and like you said, that I never thought of it in the idea, like you said, of that of the service mindset. But you can even involve those ideas in curriculum as well. When I was using a program called Bloxels, which is a video game design program that I really weaved into language arts and social studies, I would tell the kids, my job is to teach you the content skills, but I'm using Bloxels as a way for you to be more creative. Like, you have to figure a lot of this out on your own. And when a student would ask me for help, I would say, oh, you know what? Christopher is the expert on that. Why don't you go talk to him?
Outstanding.
Someone asked, oh, Matt's the expert on that. Go talk. They stopped coming to me and they started going to each other. And so it really created that experience. And I was able to usually, especially with a program like that, target kids that typically weren't the quote unquote expert. And like you said, with that one student, finding those, it's so valuable and important to be able to create an atmosphere like that. And I agree with you about it being harder at secondary, but I would also say it's probably more important at secondary.
Oh, yes.
Because they need that as they are reaching adulthood, and a teacher sharing their weaknesses is the best way. I did that on day one. I told my kids, I have the worst short-term memory that you'll probably have ever seen. If someone calls down and asks for someone to go to the office and I don't immediately tell that person to go to the office, someone else needs to remember to write that name on the board, because I'll forget 3 seconds later. So I really enjoyed that, Matt. I feel like I cut you off.
No, you're fine. I think one of the beautiful things that you brought up, Christopher, is that idea of kind of sticking with your procedures and integrating teachable moments and feeling comfortable to do that because you've ingrained all of the executive functioning or the soft skills of education early on, and you kind of set a precedence of what the expectations are. And one thing that I was just thinking of is, to anyone who's listening, it's totally okay to perform maintenance on those skills. And that's the way I think of it. It's the idea of like, hey, I see that our walking in the hall isn't as good as it should be. Or, you know what, our transition in between, instead of just saying, hey, it's December, we should know by now, it can be, hey, it looks like we need to make a practice. We take 30 seconds out of our day to prove we can do it again, realign expectations. And that is a great identifying a weakness, but still not necessarily like being negative about it, and ways that you can then incorporate other attributes of your class and get back to the real instruction, get back to the creativity. Hey, you know what, as we're trying new challenges, we haven't lost touch with the expectations when we're in here of trying our best, and how we behave and how we collaborate. All of those things have been practiced up until that point. And I know even practicing reading, there's the idea of like starting with 30 seconds of independent reading and working your way up, is something that you have to do with intention, especially at the beginning of the school year. To kind of tap into a few other things that I'm interested to hear from your perspective is, so we've talked about the lifestyle of a teacher, and we've also talked about what it takes to have connection with students. But can you kind of talk about, you mentioned going to the grocery store and mentioned the idea of living in the place that you teach, and how that is viewed as an asset as opposed to, oh my gosh, I can't get away from teaching. But I would imagine that your view of community and the idea of never turning off that teacher hat is something that you feel is a positive. And I think that when we get into the classroom, when we are dedicated as teachers, it's a lifelong profession, that there is some challenges, but also major benefits by making those commitments. Would you say community and touching base with kids that you've seen long ago or recently, or people that are excited to have you, or families, how that plays a role in your each year of teaching?
Well, yeah, that's another great question. Each teacher's got to be true to themselves. I mean, for some people, teaching is a lifestyle. I think for the three of us, it sounds like we're all, you've got, power up. I mean, this is part of our lifestyle. For some people, teaching is a job, and I do know some outstanding teachers that do work their standard hours, and they do a great job with that time period. But that's just not my style. That's their style. And one of the things that I think is very, very important, as long as a teacher's holding up their end of what their contract says, and doing their job with their kids, and still caring about those kids, still putting the effort into the time that they have, if they're doing their job, then I can't fault them for that. If they want to live in a different town than I do, I can't fault them for that. I prefer to, like, I've taught half of my neighborhood. I've got kids on my street going by my house that have seen me out there in my pajamas getting my mail and walking my dog looking like a mess, and and out there riding the lawnmower without my shirt on, whatever. I'm a guy that lives in the town, but by the same token, I'm comfortable with that lifestyle. What I would say to a new teacher is, decide, do you want that? Do you want your kids to go to the same school as other kids? I happen to love it. I think 2 of my kids really loved it. 1 of my kids did not love it. So that, being a teacher's kid is not the easiest life in the world. Growing up and having to go to school, and, all the kids know your dad and all that. So you have to also remember that your wife, or if you're a lady or whoever, your partner, your life partner, and your children are really, they are your priority in life. These kids at school, as important as they are, they're not our kids. And I want to take them home sometimes. I've fallen in love with a lot of my students. But the bottom line is, my 3 kids and my wife are the most important people, and my father and my mom are the most important people in my life. And I always have to remember that too. So it's really finding out what what balance you really want to have if you want to have that community relationship. I tend to be a very family oriented guy and kind of embrace community as part of my family. So that just fits me, but it might not fit everybody. So I think early on in a career, you could end up testing out. I wouldn't buy a house the very first year you get hired somewhere. I wouldn't buy a house in the town that you're about to teach in. Maybe if you're thinking live there, get an apartment first, live there for a year, see if it's right for you, and then settle down. But that's kind of the direction I would look at that. But I will tell you a neat story, Matt, that goes along with this. So with the book release 2 days ago, 22 people endorsed this book, and that includes university presidents, all kinds of people. But embedded in there is also a boy named Jacob Cianci Gaskill. And Jacob was my fourth grader back from 2001 to 2003. This year he earned his PhD. He's my very first PhD student from the University of Missouri in biology. And, I thought about it a little bit, and I thought, well, what's the difference between his insight right now and he reads this book versus somebody else? He's just going to give a young, fresh perspective on it. It'll give a nice, diverse perspective. He belongs back there just as much as anybody else. So a student has endorsed this book. That's a former student of mine. The chapter 3 in the book focused on something called Field of Dreams Uganda. This was one of my soccer players back in West Virginia. I used to coach varsity soccer down there, and then up in Brockport for a while. And he went on to found a group, and a very fascinating story with this. In Uganda, these kids down there, when girls mature in Uganda, they miss about 30% of their schooling because of embarrassment, because of hygiene. And Mike discovered this. His name's Mike Warnicki, and he decided to do something about it. He fell in love with the people of Uganda because they're people of hope, but they're the poorest people he's ever met. And he's gone for it. Now, and he's gone there and created 13 schools and gone on to do some wonderful things. Mike was also at the book kickoff. So what I would say is this. Throughout my career, I've brought kids along, but I've also not made them my friend too fast. They're still kids, and when they're in high school, they're high schoolers. You might, be inclined to start making that adult relationship, but I've always been very careful to watch how they're maturing while I'm living in the town that I am, and as I become friends with them. Now, Jacob is now 28 years old. He's fully married. He's looking at the world from an adult perspective, so now we have adult conversations, and now we can have those conversations that wouldn't have been appropriate when he was 16 years old, when I was coaching him in baseball, but are very appropriate now. Same thing with Mike. I'm 49 years old. Mike is now 42 years old. I mean, what could be better fun than that? We share memories of player coach from back when, but now we're pretty close to the same age now, and he's gone on to do things that I could only dream of doing. So for me, living in the same town and having that long-term relationship has been wonderful. For other people, they might just want to be very private and have their own kids and their family, and that's okay too. I think the most important thing is that you're happy as a teacher and doing, you're projecting that fresh start every day, and whatever it takes to do that, that's what you do.
I really love that perspective. That's something that I am battling with now myself. I've been teaching in the same district for this is year 10, and I live about 25 minutes away. My wife and I, over the next 4 or 5 years, will probably move. Our house is quickly filling up with kids,
Yeah.
And it's something that my wife and I have talked a lot about. Do we want to live in the community that I teach in? I love the community that I teach in. I see myself being there for a very long time, and it's something that you have to think long and hard about. I mean, I am all in on my district, and I am all in when I was in the classroom with my kids. But like you said, living in that community is just another layer. It's not better. It's not worse. It's what are you comfortable with? How do you want that to play into the relationships that you have with the families? Do I want my son playing sports with kids that are going to be in my class? All those types of things, I think is really important for teachers to think about, especially younger teachers. Like you said, I'm blown away right now, and I just feel like I'm learning so much from you. I'm really enjoying this conversation.
I'm learning I'm learning too. It's good.
What would you say is, if you had to think about reflections or comments or feedback that you've received from students, or just if you had to generalize it, what would they say makes your class special? It's obvious that your class is special. The accolades that you've won, the way your kids stay connected with you, it's very clear. What would you say is something that they would say stands out for you as a classroom teacher?
Never really thought about that. I never really look at myself as standing out from other teachers. So I that's one I'm going to have a little bit of a tough time answering. Well, I see. I'm thinking of two young teachers in our school right now that are in years 5 and year 4, and one's named Justin, the other's name is Brittany, and their talent level and their passion and their dedication to our school is tremendous, and kids are getting a great experience out of their classroom, and I see the same great things happening in their classrooms as well. What I think, I don't know if I would ever put myself above any other classroom. I don't think I could do that, because I think almost every teacher probably has students that consider them their favorite teacher, and they're just, they might not be as blingy or as shiny as some other teachers, stand out as other teachers.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
So what is it that the students that would pick you as their favorite and others may pick a different teacher? What makes you special?
Question. Yeah, that's a more fair question, because I just don't see it. I think every teacher in my school really does have some great talent.
I completely agree.
What I see in my particular situation, I think I go far above and beyond with my time. When I call home, I don't always call home to talk to parents. I call home to talk to kids. I think parents are very, I've been in the same town now. We're coming up on year 24, so I'm getting kids of the parents were my kids, or athletes. They played either baseball or soccer for me. So I've had a multiple amount of those. So they know what they're coming into it. So they know they're getting a lot of time. I'll give you some examples of things in our classroom that might be special. We raise trout. Every year we live on Lake Ontario, and I work with the Fish and Game Commission of New York State. We get little eggs, and we've got a 100-gallon tank in our classroom, and it's cold water. It's 54 degrees, and they get to see the trout grow up to be fingerlings about 3 inches long, and then we release them into Lake Ontario. It's like a little extra. I think that students in my classroom would say he always did the little extra things with us. So he always took me to his baseball practice with him, or he picked me up this one time and we went and got the classroom hamster. Like I stretch the boundaries on that. We meet up at the pet store and we get the classroom hamster with 4 kids in my class, randomly picked. And it's not picked out of a hat in front of everybody. I kind of quietly do it, and we just go do it together. So I think I'm the guy that probably did all the little things behind the scenes and made special moments that we shared together in more intimate things. And also, I would say that I'm a little old-fashioned in the way that I do have a disciplined classroom. I don't tolerate poor behavior. And I hold a line with kids that's very clear what my expectations are academically, socially, behaviorally. And I think they appreciate that clear line. There's some people that their classroom management just is not strong, and I don't think they gain the respect of those students. I know as a coach, your athletes look back on you. The coaches that in the moment it was hell going through that moment, but in the long run, those kids will love you for it. And I would say that those teachers tend to get remembered a little more. My favorite teacher held the line with me. He was tough as nails. He was my 5th grade teacher. I'm sure you both have. I mean, who was your favorite teacher? Who was it?
Mrs. Moss. She was right there with you. I mean, and I will remember that forever. She just found that balance of, it was no nonsense. Like, if you toe that line, then you know the consequence you're going to get. Otherwise, we can have a great time. Just don't mess around.
Did she get the best out of you, though?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Ken, what about you? Who was your favorite teacher?
My 6th grade teacher, which was still elementary school where I went, Mr. Cashman. Same thing. He was a blast. We had a ton of fun, but there was clear expectations. To quote Rhett Oldham, who was our second guest on show 3, lacking I'm not gonna be able to pronounce this word.
Ambiguity.
Help me out.
Ambiguity.
Ambiguity.
Yeah.
Lacking that, the clear lines, like you said, they know exactly what you expect, and they know if they're below the line or above the line. And I actually have the pleasure of still working again with my favorite teacher. He's the high school principal in my district. So as an instructional coach, I'm involved with him again. And got to be honest, it's the same as a principal. He's a great person to work for. I can see that, but he's got clear expectations.
You calling him Mr. or you got his first name?
I'm allowed to call him his first name now. It took a while for me to be comfortable calling him Steve. And as a kid, I was Kenny. So he was calling me Kenny. Everybody's calling me Ken. I'm calling him Mr. Cashman. He's now Dr. Cashman. People are calling him Steve. It's a mess between the two of us.
And that, you know what, Mr. Karg, here I am almost 50 years old, and Mr. Karg is in his 70s, and he's still Mr. Karg. We both went to the same college. We both went to St. Bonaventure years apart. We go to Bonaventure games together. We share a beverage together, all that good stuff. But he's still calling Mr. Karg. And every once in a while, he still call me Jim, and I don't, because I just can't.
Yeah.
And that's something I'm working on with Jacob right now. The fellow that drove out for the book release, that was part of both guys. One calls me Coach Albrecht and the other calls me Mr. Albrecht still. And but I think that we're getting closer with each year. I think it probably with Steve too. Kenny, you're getting closer. Kenny, you're getting closer to Ken.
Yep. Exactly.
To be respectful of your time, this could go on forever. I do have kind of I want to tap into the national park thing as we are donning gear. I think that's a unique aspect of something that also pulls in to your classroom and I'm sure enhances. So can you kind of talk about, what you do for the National Park Service? What are you doing during the school year as well as the summer? Obviously, it's probably more intensive in the summer, but just as an ambassador and how that also plays a role in your 10-month job or role, passion of a teacher.
Okay. So the reason I got involved in the national parks, first of all, I was interested. I'm from upstate New York, so and just like Pennsylvania, I guess you're closer to Blue Ridge Mountain, Shenandoah, all those things. I guess Valley Forge is down that area. So you have that opportunity. I didn't. I had the Women's Rights Hall of Fame, and I had the Teddy Roosevelt inaugural site in upstate New York, and that's it. So I did not grow up with the national parks. I grew up with state parks in New York and mostly the Adirondacks. So the national parks became a phenomenon that I figured out when I was in college on a road trip, and I just all of a sudden my jaw dropped, and I never knew about these places. So as I raised my children, I took them to the national parks, and now when my children grew up, I decided now to go into the national parks as a summertime ranger. I would encourage any teacher to do it. Just make sure, because my spouse is not along with me. She's still back in Rochester, working. So we had to have some very candid conversations about this. Is this going to be okay for our relationship? But this is one of my long-term goals. When I am finished with teaching, I would like to move into the national parks and actually move into leadership in the national park system. So the thing the reason I really got involved in national parks last year was 2020, and that was a very significant year that passed us in education, and it has nothing to do with the pandemic. It was the 100th anniversary of the national passing of the 19th Amendment, and I was very frustrated back in actually 2018. I was speaking. I told you I was a state teacher of the year that year. I had a lot of speaking engagements. I was the first male speaker at an all-female group at a college that gives out scholarships to female students in the education department. And I was talking to them. In New York State, suffrage was granted in 1918. And I was talking to an all-women's group of about 80 women, and I said, this is a great year. This is the 100th anniversary. And I got blank stares. And not a single woman there knew the history of women's suffrage in New York State, that they were on the 100th anniversary. And all of a sudden, I thought, whoa, okay, speech over. We're going to have a frank conversation right now. And they weren't aware of that. And what I noticed was there's a lot of our history that we're unaware of. And I think a lot of the things that are going on in the United States right now, a lot of our challenges, they call our country, I've heard the word polarized 100 times, in the past few days alone, let alone over the past year. If we're going to come back to the middle, history is going to have to be a huge part of that. So what I decided back in 2019 was, with the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage, I was going to go into the national park system and do something with women's suffrage. What I did, I started researching, and I found out that the Homestead Act under Abraham Lincoln in 1862 had a lot to do with women's suffrage. And what it did, the 14 states and territories west of the Mississippi granted suffrage prior to the 19th Amendment, starting with Wyoming Territory in 1869. So we're talking almost 50 years prior. And I did a big whoa, why did that happen? Let's tell that story. So what I did is I applied for a job at Homestead National Monument out in Nebraska. And instead of complaining about the fact that we don't have curriculum on suffrage, here I am at school, we don't have this, we don't have that, I decided to go do something about it. So I went out to Nebraska. I created original programming for a national park out there at Homestead. And that's still working today. Published articles on the topic and tried to do my own little part, and then I brought it back to the classroom. This year I'm up in Calais, Maine, doing the same thing with the national parks. One of the things that we're facing right now is a challenge in our country in terms of culture and race. We seem to, at least we hear about it in the news. Now, I'm more willing to believe that most people are very accepting and very tolerant and very understanding and very empathetic of all people. I think most of the people in the world are good people. But what seems to be in the news right now is a divide. So I decided, instead of, complaining about it and sitting there, what do I do about it? I'm going to do something about it in the summer. So the French settlement of 1604 was up here in Calais, Maine. And what I've done, I've come up here, and it's my belief that the very first people from Africa, the very first free Africans in the history of North America actually set foot right here up in Maine back in 1604. They were interpreters, and actually highly educated interpreters. I think that's a history that would do a tremendous amount of good for people to hear about right now. And we could learn a lot of lessons from the fact that these were highly educated people. Therefore, they were the great equalizer was education for those people. So that's what I'm spending my time with the national parks. Do I want to go be a park ranger in like Grand Teton or Grand Canyon or Yellowstone? No. Because those ones, I want to do my backcountry hiking and enjoy my time. So what I'm doing is my summers are spent in historical parks where I can tell a story, and then the places I visit are my natural parks, which is my happy place. So that's what I'm doing with my time in the Park Service. But I have a purpose in doing this. It's wonderful being a park ranger. It doesn't pay very well, but it's a very, very low stress, very high energy, very gratifying experience. You get a lot of kids, swearing a junior ranger in at a park. A little kid's done his junior ranger book, and you can pin a badge on him and say, or pin a badge on her and say, great job, and have them take the junior ranger oath. That's what I'm doing all day here, along with my research on the history of this, unknown story. It's a wonderful way to spend a summer, but it does take a toll on a relationship. So I have to be very careful that my wife is taken care of, that she's taking care of herself, that she's okay with it. She's going to come up in a few weeks and spend a few days up here. But that's kind of the balance of that, understanding your home life. That's like mentoring that student teacher at my own home. How would she know until she's actually seen it in person? And it took me some time to really talk it out with my wife before I made that decision. But that's my love of the national parks. There's a historical and a natural perspective to it. I tend to like the vacation part, the natural parks, the historical park. I tend to gravitate towards as an educator. So I think I'll probably be a leader some point along the line in the next 10 to 15 years, probably in a small national park that has great history.
I think it's wonderful. And to tie it all together, the fourth grade component of it is a great thing. I know our passion happens to be we have the opportunity to read about the national parks. We have a story called Letters Home from Yosemite in one of our ELA that kind of documents the journaling through the different highlights of Yosemite, which has turned into a jigsaw of kids each choosing national parks across the country, and historic monuments and doing research on those. And one of the coolest things, it's turned into my wife and I dressing up as Ranger Rogerses and reading some of the literature that actually comes from many of the gift shops and are the sponsored books by the national parks. But what's so wonderful is I've been seeing and getting notes of kids planning, being invested in their summer vacation. And where we're at has Valley Forge, and it has Shenandoah and Great Smoky Mountains in driving distance, but we still aren't the West where the heavy concentration is. So to kind of set what the beautiful thing about it from my end, and then we can move on to other things, is we have kids where I teach that don't leave the town that they live in because their family has never left the town that they live in. And so there's just a cycle over and over again to really fall in love with the great big world, let alone the natural wonders that have been created as gifts for us all to enjoy. So it is definitely something, and the idea that it's free for a fourth grader to come to the park as an encouragement is an incredible thing to get yourself hooked. I wish I was, I only caught on at 24. I wish I did it much younger.
Yeah, and one of the great resources the national park's been working on heavily to try to get people out of, whether it's an urban area or an area that doesn't have national parks, especially here in the Northeast, we tend to not have as many national parks as, let's say, California or Alaska or, the West, or at least some of the grand ones. We've got the historical, but we don't seem to have those really grand parks. The National Parks website, nps.gov, I would, anybody listening to this podcast, I would check it out because each park, there's a tremendous amount of resources on there. One of the things we do with the national parks is we do something similar. The kids all pick their own national park, monument, or historic site. And what they do is they call the park. They actually have to call the park, talk to a ranger, and then find out about a program they have there and if they can earn a patch or a badge. And almost every kid does a junior ranger virtually online with a ranger, and then all of a sudden in the mail comes that little gold plastic badge or a little pin or patch, and then they get to talk to the class about it. And it sounds like a small thing as an adult, what's a pin? But when you're a kid, you're 7, 8, 9, you're 10 years old, you get something like that in the mail. There's something about that time period in your life. You might remember that you might remember that for your entire life. I can remember getting little things like that when I was a kid, and how, I remember when a pilot gave me a little pin on an airplane that had wings on it, and that was my first time on an airplane. It's the same thing in the national parks. And I know we do a lot with email and texting nowadays and, instant this and that, but a real letter in the mail from a national park to a kid, that could be a one blip moment that could actually change a life and really change an interest or change, one of the things I don't want to go to my grave doing is defining myself as what I do for a job. I want to define myself as who I am and my character. And the kids don't have to grow up to be park rangers, but at least it opens their eyes up to when they have summers off or a vacation time. They take ownership of that and go to some of these amazing places. Just like you said, Matt, that these places are for them. These have been treasures set aside for them. And it's our obligation right now, not just to form these kids and help them live healthy lives in their careers. We always say career and college ready. What about civic mindedness or career, college, and joy ready? I mean, half of our day is spent in our own free time. We should, better than going on. I agree with a good Netflix marathon every once in a while, but we don't want to make a lifestyle out of that. And we want to teach kids, to be a happy human being, you have to find what you're passionate about in your free time and pursue that. Your passion doesn't have to come out of your job. Your passion has to come out of your life. And you're lucky if it comes out of your job, then that's just great. But it for a lot of people, it doesn't. So then you have to find it in your own free time. And we need to teach kids that because a lot of kids don't. That's one of the things that I attacked in this book was our purpose in life. Our purpose is not necessarily just defined by our job. It's defined by how we define the 24 hours of our day. And a lot of it is not our job time. It's important.
And even if, and like you said, even if they don't pursue a passion in becoming a park ranger or, visiting all the national parks, they also were involved in an experience where they reached out to a a resource or an authority, and they heard back from it in a positive way. And so when they become interested in space travel and they want to write NASA, maybe they'll hear back from NASA, or whatever the case is, they're learning an experience where they can take action, and it might open a door. It might give them an opportunity to have a tour of a place that you typically don't get a tour of, or whatever the case is. But that experience, I think, is so important. And I think anybody listening to this can probably think back to a moment where they received something, like you said. It might seem silly, like the wings of an airplane or whatever the case is, but remembering that moment where you got something that was really special to you, and every time you open your drawer and you see it, you think, wow, this means a lot to me. I can't believe I still have this, but I can't get rid of it because I want to keep it. I think everybody has those things like that, and they're cemented by those real experiences, like you said. Just like Matt said a couple minutes ago, I could go on all night, but I do want to respect your time and make sure we don't talk for hours here. So I do want to transition into our lesson lens segment, where we learn a little bit more about a project or a lesson that you've done in the past or that you're still doing in your classroom. So the first question is, are we going to look at a unit overview, a long-term project, or a single lesson?
Wow, I wasn't prepared for that. So much to draw from. Let's go with a Oh, boy, you opened up Pandora's box right there. We could go with a lot of different things.
You don't have that
Bad
much
things aren't coming. Bad things aren't coming out. Good things are coming out. Let's go with a methodology. Can we go with a methodology? So a methodology of a unit?
Absolutely.
Okay. Do you want me to describe it?
We're going to have some rapid fire questions, and then you can elaborate as you feel. So,
absolutely, rapid fire away.
All right. So I would assume that we understand the grade level this is directed at, but do you have a specific subject area and time of year that you would consider?
Writing year long.
All right.
Evolution of writing year long.
So the next question is, what are the objectives of the lesson? So is this involving building all of their writing skills throughout the year?
Correct. So this would be the ability to revise and edit their own work independently without me having to correct it, and that having them be able to identify it in themselves and their peers.
So talking about that phased process, what would you say are the students required to do or actively doing at different times of the year?
Okay, so what we do, our school subscribes to Lucy Calkins, and Lucy Calkins is very kind of a loose structure of writing. I've tightened it down. So what we have is we have different colored pens in the classroom, red, green, blue, black, and purple. And what I do is I'll teach something. So let's say we're doing a personal narrative. We do narratives at the beginning of the year. And blue pen represents word choice and voice. Green pen represents sentences, different variety of sentences. Black pen represents elaboration of ideas. Red pen represents conventions, spelling, and grammar. And then the purple pen is the all pen. So what we do at the beginning of the year is we start with a purple pen. I have them read it to themselves. We've got those PVC pipe telephones. I think a lot of teachers have made those. They read it to themselves out loud. So it teaches them you have to read over your own work to yourself. But the second part of it is then we'll isolate different skills. One of the things that we tend to do with writing is we say, okay, write this, but then we want more substance. And there seems to be a trend in the past few years of getting away from creative writing. So I slow it down. I work on longer pieces and try to help the kids make them themselves, make them into something quality. So if we go to blue pen is word choice and voice. I might teach something on, let's say it's fourth grade, so it's we'll get the thesauruses out. We'll have a piece that I created. We'll talk about $1 million words versus just 10-cent words. We'll learn to use that thesaurus. They will then revise what Mr. Albrecht's created in his piece, so we understand how to do it. Then we'll go to the document cam. Well, it's a document cam on our Clear Touch. We'll do it together. We'll talk about it. I will model it. And then they go with their own blue pens back into their own work. They'll box words, and then they'll change the vocabulary to those words. And then what we'll have is we'll have a pairing up, and we'll have a brag session where one kid says to the other kid what they did. The other kid says to the first one what they did, and then you cannot say what you did to the class. You have to brag about your partner. So, so the quiet kid sometimes doesn't speak up when they've done something brilliant. Then their partner speaks up for them. It's a little easier sharing. And then we'll do the same methodology. We might, with narratives, we might be using dialogue. So we might practice the grammar of dialogue. Then we work on Mr. Albrecht's, try to find all the mistakes that he made in his. We'll use, green pen on that, and then we'll apply it to our writing on the other side and try to fix up the conventions of dialogue with all the quotations and the commas. But what we'll do all year long is the kids have to take ownership of it. Revising is a very tough thing. Editing's easy. Editing is very black and white. Spelling, grammar, conventions, very easy. But revising is tough because there's a million type of sentences, there's a million type of words, and you can't just teach word choice and voice along with sentence variety at the same time. It's like juggling 500 bowling balls. It's just going to fall to the ground. So you have to take away a lot of the other pieces of writing and focus on those small areas. Like if I'm teaching similes, we're only applying similes right now. We're not worried about spelling. We're not worried about anything else. It's almost like if a kid doesn't have math facts down and has to do long division, then they're going to fall apart. So it's too many things to juggle, the process and the individual skills. Well, the same thing's in writing. They can't revise unless you've isolated the individual little skills as we go along. What I found is as we go along throughout the year, then they'll, second writing assignment, third writing assignment, fourth writing assignment. By about the fourth one in about March, they're starting to take those colored pens and they know exactly what to do with it. I'll model it real quick and then instantly they're bang, go. And they can revise their own work. A lot of kids, I've noticed the deficiency in writing right now is high. I argue that writing comes before reading. A lot of people say good readers make great writers, but how can you identify a simile in a piece of reading when you can't write it yourself? Once you've learned how to write it, you'll identify it in what you read. So I would say if you want better readers, teach them how to write.
I love that. It's I never did anything with the pens like that. I will say, as I became a more experienced teacher, I started to realize the value in revising the way you were describing, and when I would have them meet with peers to do peer revising or peer editing, it was, you're only working on this, you're only focusing on this skill that we were just talking about. You're not doing anything else. You're not allowed to fix a single misspelled word, any of that stuff. But I really like the idea of the colored pens because, like you said, as they become more independent, they're associating with that.
Yeah.
What was
Ken, just like we said before with behavior, as the year goes on, behavior evolves the way we teach it. As the year goes on, the way curriculum evolves the way it's instructed should evolve also. Everything should evolve. If you're doing the same thing in the fall, in February, March, something's gone wrong. It should evolve as the kids are, maturing.
That's a fantastic point. So during those active learning moments and aside from the modeling that you've described, what are other things that you're doing to ensure the success of the students?
Frequent conferences, making it Matt brought up the point of you're almost co-teaching with the kids and Ken, maybe you said it, where you let the kids, you find what they're strong in, and they almost become co-teachers with you. What that does is free up your time then as a teacher to then work with other people, but you have to put that sense of accountability in place early on in the year, that if they're helping other students, they are helping other students. And that way, once that's established, it's not like you have to worry about 20, 25 kids in a classroom. You can look at the kids that are struggling in that moment and be able to move to those kids and work with them in a very, very natural, peaceful way without worrying, having that anxiety of the pressure of those other 18 or 19 kids that you're not being attentive to in that moment. So I would say that's the key essential to a classroom. Co-teach with your kids. I love having parent volunteers in. The past 2 years haven't been that way, and I've relied on my kids to be my co-teachers, and it's worked out just fine.
So I guess the last question, and this might be an interesting, since it's a continuum that continues to grow, but is the idea of advice or things that you'd like to adjust to enhance this unit or this method. I would imagine covering more areas of grammar or high level vocabulary might be a feature. But is there a final project that you would like to see your kids do, or just competency with high level creative writing?
I would, in terms of writing, so specific.
Yeah, specific to this lesson or unit.
So specific to this, I would like them to start pursuing writing in the way that they're interested in using it. So just like, towards the end of the year, I would say the evolution of curriculum should evolve into almost a balance between what the students are interested in and what the standards are dictating that we have to impart to the kids. So at that point in the year, we're talking like April, May, June, I would like to start seeing kids, seeing what they've learned over the course of the year, taking it upon themselves, I want to pursue this further, and taking it upon themselves to almost create their own curriculum. I do a tremendous amount of differentiation in my class. It takes a lot of time, a lot of individual work, but I would say that's the natural progression, because kids need to, not only learn basic skills and have their eyes opened up to things like we talked about, the national parks that they might not know about, but they also have things that they're interested in that they already know about, and they should have that time to be able to explore those things. And towards the end of the year, once things have been established and they have those clear abilities to teach themselves, I would say then start letting that natural progression of lifelong learning, that ownership of learning take over at that point. And as they're ready, some kids are ready for it, some kids are not. It doesn't all happen at the same time, but that's where, you balance it out with groupings and different things like that. And each class is different. There's no real set methodology, because this year's class will be like no other year, and next year's will be too. I would say, though, to a teacher, if you're having the toughest year of your career and you want to complain about your class, start doing this. If somebody asks you how your school year's going, just say it's a great year. Because you've got to say that, because I've had years where I've had kids that are very, very challenging and all that, but I also have to remember that every other kid in that class, including that challenging kid, it's their only shot at fourth grade. They're not going to be repeating fourth grade. This is it. They're never going to get another fourth grade for the rest of their lives. So we can't have a bad year. We never can have a bad year. It's got to be, we're doing a great job. We're trying hard, and it's a good year. As long as you're trying, it's a good year.
Like you said, every year is going to be totally different behaviorally, just the way the group meshes together, their academic capabilities, all of their maturity level. It fluctuates. It's amazing how pockets of grade levels can be so different in those big areas. And I think part of it is they kind of feed off of each other in their strengths and their weaknesses, and it just kind of grows as they reach fourth and fifth grade. But like you said, you can't waste the year. That's not acceptable.
No. Ken, how many kids do you have?
My own children?
Yeah.
I have 3.
Okay, so you're going to see that evolution in your own kids too. So as your kids grow, just like classrooms, they're going to have different styles of doing things. I have one very kind of clumsy kid, and I have 2 very athletic kids, totally different from each other. 2 very competitive kids, one kid that's very, probably will never have an ulcer, never anything. He's just very laid back. So just like classes, even within your own family, you're going to find as your kids get older, they're going to be different from each other. Even you're going to bring them up with your wife the same way, essentially, but they're going to take on their own personalities. And classes tend to too. This year I had a class where I had 7 kids that were in horseback riding. I've never had a class like that before. Was horseback riding a big part of our class this year? Yeah, I thought it was great. And, I raced it. They brought stuff. I learned some from the kids, which was wonderful. And I attended a lot of horseback riding lessons. Went and saw the kids.
That's wonderful.
That's amazing.
And to kind of tie back into what you started with, this is the beauty of being the adjustability. And you open by talking about the ability of, hey, how today needs to go. And when to not waste the day, or to recognize when it's going to be a good day or a bad day, or a tough group or an easier group, there's an element of reading that, and every single day making those adjustments. That's what's addicting about teaching, in my opinion, is really adjusting yourself, adjusting the curriculum to match what your kids need to make it truly a great day. To not just say it, but to make it a great day because you get to create it into a great day. So,
And Matt, that's the art of teaching right there. You
Yep.
just summed up the art.
I think I don't remember if it was one of our guests or just a teacher I've talked to, talking about making it special for those kids and finding a way to make it special for each of those kids. This teacher said you should be able to give a special award to every child in your class, and if you can't, you don't know them well enough. You should be able to identify something special about them and give them, even if you're not actually giving out like awards to every kid. You should be able to sit down and say, come up with some creative award name for every single kid, and you should be able to think back on individual conversations, both curricularly and separated from that that you can with each of your students, and stepping out of your own comfort zone to make them feel special, like you said, Christopher, about horseback riding. Making that a big part of your class because it matched your kids. I remember I had a student who came to school wearing a cape one day. Was not really I would say, not in style at all. I happened to have a cape from Matt from STEM camp, or professional development event that we ran. It was hanging in my closet. I brought it from a PD event. I never knew why I was going to have it in my classroom. I wore it the whole day. And she had the biggest smile on her face the entire day. Her mom called me to thank me for it. And, just moments like that, you can really change their lives for the best. So, again, don't want to stop this conversation, but I do want to move into our last segment of the show called the Exit Ticket, where we ask the same 4 questions to every guest every week. So question number 1, what is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student's school experience better?
Absolutely. Try to find unconditional love for every child in your class, no matter how challenging. I had a girl years ago. This is in my book, actually. I wrote about this girl. I did not name her, but she had the JoJo bows. A few years ago, JoJo bows just all of a sudden were really big among the girls, and this girl showed up without JoJo bows. She didn't have JoJo bows. In fact, she had head lice and dirty, smelly. Her hair was not clean at all. I took a gamble. So this is loving unconditionally. I took a gamble. With my classroom aide, I bought a hairbrush, I bought some simple bows, and we took turns brushing this girl's hair each morning to give her the dignity that she deserved. Now, that might sound a little strange for an adult male to be brushing a girl's hair, but this poor girl right here was starting to become self-aware that she was different than these other kids. And it wasn't about what the other kids thought about her, it was what she thought about herself. So I think that showing unconditional love, when the hair did start getting head lice in December and my stomach was almost turning, I continued to do it. We got lice medicine. We did everything we possibly could do to build the unconditional love. Now that's an extreme case right there, but you have to have unconditional love for the most challenging cases and the easiest cases, unconditionally as a teacher, if you're going to survive in this profession and make these kids feel like they belong.
Another one, you've talked a lot about advice, but is there something that sticks out as the best piece of advice you've received? It could have been from a colleague, a supervisor, or a student that you really tap into in the hardest of times.
A teacher down the hall, he's still the same teacher down the hall. We've grown old together. He's 2 years away from retirement right now. He said in my second year of teaching, he said, you can't control the way a child acts, but you can control the way you react to a child. And I would say that's great advice right there. You can never control the actions of a child. I can't guarantee how a kid's going to act or what they're going to do, but I definitely have control over myself. And that's an important thing, never to lose control of yourself as a teacher.
I love that. So the school year goes in waves. We have times of struggle, typically circling around report cards, conferences, where that to-do list outside the regular classroom experience builds up. When teachers are feeling that stress, what is something that you want to say to them that they could hear in that moment to power up?
Do it together. If you're doing report cards, make a commitment to somebody that can stay professional and not get into conversations where you waste time, but don't stay at school alone. Make sure you're in it together. Make sure you're not isolating yourself from other teachers. And do take time. When there's a Friday happy hour at our school, sometimes I think to myself, oh man, I just want to go home, another happy hour. But I realize the value of it once I get to that happy hour. So I'm thinking to myself right now, don't isolate yourself as a teacher during those times where the work is starting to pile up, because when we do that, we tend to get miserable in our jobs. We need our colleagues. You need other teachers to survive in this career, and do well, to feel good about yourself, and to feel loved within your school.
So we've loved this conversation, as we've mentioned a few times. With that being said, how can people who are listening beyond Ken and I continue the conversation and connect with you in the future?
Sure. Anybody's welcome to email me. My email is CJ, so Chris Jen, Jennifer, so CJ Albrecht, ALBRECHT at msn.com. I have no problem putting my email out there. I'm on Twitter, Albrecht _NYS TOY. So New York State Teacher of the Year, Albrecht. I'm very accessible. Some of the spotlights that I've hit in my career, and it was caused by kids. These were just wonderful kids that had families that decided to be kind to me and put me in these different kind of awkward positions, I guess. I'm pretty. You can look me up online. All my information's even in the inside of the book. In there, I would be happy to talk to anybody, whether it's online, in person, over the phone. Anybody that's in this profession, or even anybody that's outside the profession that wants to talk about teaching, as long as it's in the direction of trying to stay positive for the kids and not complain about the system. I will always spend time with anybody that wants to make this system the best we can for our children.
I'm glad you said that, because that's important to note. It's about being positive and about making it better for kids. So Christopher, thank you so much. This has been a blast. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Your email, your Twitter handle, your books, we will link to all of that in our show notes page, which can be found at powereduup.com/show33. And everything will be found there. And so thanks again. I'm feeling super inspired. I feel like I learned more in this hour and a half than I have over a long stretch of my career. I think you have a phenomenal amount of wisdom to share. Your school district and your school and your colleagues, and most importantly, the families and kids, are extremely lucky to have you as a part of their community. And I know that will continue for the rest of your career, and I have no doubt that it will continue well past, especially with the work that you're doing with the national parks and trying to further educate us on how we can tap into history and improve ourselves and improve our schools and our society. So thank you so much. This has really been an honor for me and a pleasure. And so,
what I didn't consider, I do have an author website. ChristopherAlbrecht.com is an author website. I didn't, I'm thinking about school and not thinking about my own writing career right now, but I can be reached right through our contacts page, and it comes right to me. So ChristopherAlbrecht.com is another way to reach out and see some of the work that I'm doing.
Perfect. We will link to that as well. So thanks again. And Matt, why don't you sign us off out of here?
Yeah, as we power down this episode, Christopher, you have left us super powered up. We're recording this at 10:45 at night, and I am amped and ready in the middle of July to get back in the classroom and make a difference. So thank you for your time. Everyone who's listening, we hope you are well, happy, healthy, and gearing up to be the best version of yourself for kids. And we will talk to you next week.